As far as they're concerned, they wrote it, it's done.
Okay.
Right? They don't want to work with an editor. And that's great. And that's wonderful. And they have every right to do that. We, though, our whole goal is to take these writers and help them really make their story shine so that it's going to hit a broader audience. Right? And so if someone openly says, I don't want to do that, then that's wonderful. There's a ton of other presses. There are hundreds of other presses out there, like literally hundreds, that they're more than welcome to submit to, right?
Yeah.
So once we get confirmation that the person, the writer would love to collaborate with us, we do a very, very, very thorough line edit. And then we also do the concept edit.
Okay.
And it's more, again, it's a dialogue. So rarely is it take out this whole paragraph, it sucks, right? We don't do that, right? We do more concept edits, like we'll ask, what is the function of this paragraph in service of the story?
Okay.
Right? So let's say, for example, someone wrote a story and the main character goes off on a diatribe for like this backstory for 3 pages. And then all of a sudden, clunk, you're now back in the present, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is very, very awkward. It's very hard to pull that off well. And it doesn't drive a story forward, in my opinion. It can. It depends on the story, blah, blah, blah. But let's say in this example, it doesn't. I'll simply ask for how does these 3 paragraphs or 3 pages of backstory, how does this service the story itself? What in this does the reader need to know? And is there anything that could be done? Could it be broken out as more like, interesting innuendo in the story itself?
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, like we've had a few stories that we received, they had good bones, and I gave them feedback like that. And my gosh, the responses were brilliant. I mean, the stories are gorgeous. Right? So our goal isn't to make this Lisa story or Jade's story or one of our other editors' stories. Our goal is to make this the writer's story and the reader's story, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we go through all that. And then once these stories, and the author has to agree that it's final, right? So once the author agrees it's final, it then gets formatted. It actually does. We get a Library of Congress number, so a copy of it will stay in eternity in the Library of Congress, which is pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah. We use a distributor that distributes to all the big places, so the Costco's, the Targets, the Barnes and Nobles, you name it, any place can carry it. They distribute. Libraries can pick up the stories. So for all of our paperback publications can be picked up anywhere, right? Small bookstores, big bookstores, you name it. And then we also publish an ebook format. Again, just so it just depends on what you prefer, paperback or ebook, basically. Okay. So most of the time what happens is, so if it's a part of the anthology, they get a flat fee, and then they usually get a copy of the ebook and one copy of the paperback. And then we offer them to get a certain cost, right? Because some people, they want to give it to their friends and family or whatever.
Yeah.
And then what the press does is there's this thing called a one-pager. So the one-pager, it's like the 2-minute spiel of the story. What is the ISBN number? Who's the distributor? Who are the main contacts of the press? And like maybe a brief bio of the author, and then the cover of the piece. And we then distribute that to libraries, bookstores, and primarily libraries and bookstores.
Okay.
And then we also give that to the author, so that if the author wants to, he or she can distribute that to their local contacts, right? We also then put out a press release, and that press release is broadly distributed. And interestingly, we just put out a novella anthology and the press release got a lot of, it got picked up quite a bit, so that was kind of nice.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And then what we also do is we do an interview series with our authors on our website, runningwildpress.com. So we share the love. So one of our team members will reach out to the author and ask, whatever pertinent questions they have. And they always be sure to read the story beforehand so that the questions are more so tailored to that specific author and to the story itself.
Mm-hmm.
We also do a brainstorming session with all of our authors. So usually we try to have it maybe 1 or 2 months beforehand. We get our whole team together, so the whole press, and then we get all the authors together. And we have a literal rundown of here's all the things that the press provides for you, right, for publication, publicity, marketing, all that kind of stuff. And then we give them suggestions on how they can publicize themselves, right? And here's all the material that you need for it, all that stuff. Now, what's cool about that is a lot of times these authors don't realize that they are walking publicity machines themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them, they're members of writers groups. They go to conferences. They have their own favorite bookstore. They have their own favorite library, right? And it's really kind of talking to the people that they already know and who love them and kind of letting them know, like, hey, I've got this story coming out. I'd love it if, would you carry it or would you pick it up or whatever? One young lady we just published in the novella works at a gourmet hot dog shop. I'm not kidding. And which is kind of funny because her novella is called Well Fed, and she works at a gourmet hot dog shop. Anyway, yeah, I loved it. So she had a happy hour, believe it or not, and the family that owns the hot dog shop offered to have a happy hour and book signing at their place, and it looked like it went really, really well. So it's kind of, we don't leave the writer and say, okay, yeah, you go off and do whatever. Anything that they do, we make sure to advertise and to use social media. So we put it on our website and on our Facebook page and on Twitter and, tag anybody and everybody we can think of to make sure that, it's as broadly, it can be as broadly made aware as possible, which was like the crappiest sentence on the planet, but hey, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we really, really partner for like novels. So full length pieces, we follow a model, that's pretty common, I think, among small presses. It's more of a POD style. So we'll give a small amount up front.
Okay.
And then, after that they get, it's a 40-60. So 40% of net sales go to the author and 60 go to the press. We sometimes negotiate that if it's a better known author. We'll pay them more, I guess you could say. We'll have a cookbook coming out by a pretty well known chef in Philadelphia. He wants to do one, that's really more about how to get your family to cook together. Cool. And, yeah, it's cool. And he's going to give, I think, 10% of proceeds to a charity.
Okay.
So we thought that was great and said, hey, we'll take the 10% out of our cut, right? Like, that's not a big deal. So it's kind of like a win for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's our, like, how we do acceptances. That's our business model, our payment structure. So.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in the writing and, let's say, publishing world, what are some really bad recommendations or information that you hear people constantly giving out?
Oh, wow. So one is, just go ahead and self-publish yourself.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I do really honestly believe it depends on your own personal goals. I had one woman when I had the writers community in Philadelphia, I had a woman who came to me. She wanted me to consult with her on a business book, and she had been a very senior executive, right? And she showed me some of the material, but she was basically, quote unquote, quoting instances that she experienced in her life. And I said, is any of this documented anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Or is this purely anecdotal? And she admitted it was just anecdotal. And I'm like, well, the problem is you're saying some kind of racy stuff here. And, you're setting yourself, and, if someone chooses to publish this, up for lawsuit, right? Uh-huh. And she never thought of it that way. She just thought, well, this is my truth, right? Which is great. It's great. We all have our truths. Mm-hmm. So, in her mind, I was I was her last step before she decided to self-publish.
Okay.
And I advised her, I'm like, this is your choice. It's your life. It's your story. But if you're going to publish this as a business book, and you're basically positioning some people as the antagonists, then you may want to seriously consider how you approach this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, change names to protect the not so innocent. I don't know.
Right.
In her case, telling her to publish on Amazon was a bad idea. I mean, just from a morality perspective, right? Okay. If the other big one that I struggled with a lot was, I was told, don't accept anything except for a big publishing house, mm-hmm. right? And although I understood the intent behind that, and the intent was, don't go poor, right? Like the assumption that if you go with a big house, then suddenly that by default means you're going to do really well. Mm-hmm. The reality is what we had talked about earlier, right? I mean, a large house is only going to go after pieces that they believe are actually going to sell and sell well. Otherwise, there's no point,
sure.
Right? From their perspective, which is, I totally get, right? Yeah. So, that is also, to me, a bad bit of advice. Another bit of advice I've heard is like, if you don't get published in 2 years, give up. I know of people who've been writing, and they're gorgeous writers, for more than 10 years, and they haven't been published. And it doesn't mean that the writing's bad. It may mean they don't really know where they fit in the grander scheme of things, or where their writing fits, and they just haven't found the right place. It can mean thousands of things, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really, bad advice. Yeah, I mean, that's anything that's kind of limiting, I think, is bad advice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything that kind of wants people to stop, or, just kind of give up when they don't need to.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, or like, this is my rule for life, right? My rule for life is, unless I know this is going to be a New York Times bestseller, screw you, I'm not doing it. Well, that's kind of, okay, that's your choice, right? But that doesn't have to be the rule for everybody else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with New York Times bestsellers is I read a few articles about this. It's technically, there are ways to game it and to buy mm-hmm. yourself into those.
Oh yeah, did you see the one? Some woman did that. Did you read that? It was a few months ago, I think.
Ooh, I don't know if I read that one, but I have read a couple articles about, I forgot what it was. Like, there was an actual company that came out with exactly the strategy they used to get someone onto the New York Times bestseller list by partnering with a couple different locations of calling a bunch of different Barnes and Nobles, and
yep.
Their entire strategy was listed on there, and I was like, wow, this is, first off, I had no idea it was that easy for mm-hmm. Less than $10,000 to basically buy yourself a bestseller. Mm-hmm. But it's cool they put their entire strategy up, because if somebody was so inclined, they could just follow the exact same strategy again and repeat that process.
Yeah, and if you want to forward that to me, then I'm totally fine with that.
I will. I'll once I find the article again, I will forward that to you, because it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. So for my own personal thing, I'm investigating that kind of stuff just because I'm interested in the publishing world and of writing a business card book, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how other people approach that technique. So it was just in my usual research.